Once something has been heard, it can't be unheard. And this can really work to your advantage when someone is telling you exactly who they are. Because some words and phrases can serve as major red flags in any relationship. So that's why we are talking through 10 toxic phrases that you might want to look out for if you think you're in a toxic relationship. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Common Ego community. My name is Christina. On this channel, we talk about emotional abuse, narcissism, and self-development. Today, we are talking about 10 phrases, 10 toxic phrases that you might hear from a narcissist, a manipulative person, or someone who is just going to be a toxic influence in your life. Now, before we get to this, I want to point out that if you have ever said these things in a toxic relationship, it's kind of understandable. So the phrases that have made this list really don't have any place in a healthy relationship. And if these are things that are coming up over and over again, you can bet that there's a lot of toxicity in this relationship. Nonetheless, if you find yourself saying these phrases a lot, or if someone else in the relationship says these phrases a lot, it's definitely something to look into. Go over that relationship with a fine-tooth comb and see where you can either improve it or whether it's a relationship that you really want to continue with. But more specifically, I wanted to do this video today to give some of you some insight on some toxic patterns that show up fairly early on in a relationship. So these are things that you really want to pay attention to. And if you think you're in a toxic relationship, I have a free download that you can access from the description box below that will give you more information and a checklist on toxic patterns in a relationship. And here's a hint, it's a lot about how that relationship and that person makes you feel. So let's jump right in to the 10 toxic phrases. If you hear these phrases, you may want to run. So the first toxic phrase is, "You're just like," insert the name of this toxic influence in your life here. So for some people, it might be a parent. You're just like your mother. You're just like your father. And even if that person is not necessarily a toxic influence to you, the way that this one is said implies that it's a bad thing. You know, you're just like your mother, and that is a terrible thing. You embody all the negative characteristics of this one person. Now, first of all, if the person that they're comparing you to is actually a toxic influence in your life, or if they have some, really negative traits that you don't want to be associated with, this is going to come across as a dig. And if you're being compared to somebody that you've never had an issue with, somebody who's close to you, this one can hit a little bit close to home because first of all, you're wondering, well, what's wrong with this other person? I love them. There's no issue here. And then second of all, you're wondering, what's wrong with me? And that's what this is meant to do. This is meant to get you to question yourself and sometimes to question the other person too. So the second toxic phrase is, "You're too sensitive," or "You're overreacting," or "You're making a big deal out of nothing." Now this phrase is usually problematic because what this person is doing is kind of invalidating your feelings. Even if it's something that has nothing to do with them, they're kind of invalidating the way you feel about that whatever situation that was. And that can be a red flag because if they're not honoring your feelings about something that has nothing to do with them, how are they going to act when it's something that does, when they've done something to hurt your feelings? One exception here would be if you asked their opinion and, maybe you think that you acted without getting all the information and that could have seemed like you were overreacting. But still, in this situation, you should feel like this person is honoring your feelings and how you feel about it. And they may have an opinion that they can share with you, but they're not trying to override your feelings. This is especially a red flag, of course, when what you're talking about is how the other person hurt your feelings. So if they've done or said something that hurt you and you let them know that it hurt you and they kind of just brush it off and say, "You're too sensitive," instead of saying, "I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to hurt your feelings," or something like that. So depending on where and how often this shows up in your relationship, it may be a major red flag or it may be a smaller one. but it's usually never a good sign. Okay, so the third toxic phrase is really kind of more a category of phrases, and that is any type of ultimatum. And these are especially damaging when one thing has nothing to do with the other. So if you vote for this candidate, I am leaving you. Or if you don't go to my mother's party, I'm never doing your laundry again. So at the root of this phrase is a very transactional view of the relationship. So the person who's saying this views the relationship very transactionally. If you don't do this thing, I will not be in this relationship anymore. Or if I don't get my way, then I'm going to somehow punish you. And these are really, really damaging ultimatums. And if somebody is willing to do that, then you've got to wonder what else they're willing to do. So now I know whenever I talk about ultimatums, there's always somebody who comments about how they may have given an ultimatum to a narcissist or a toxic person to their life about the relationship. So, if you don't start treating me with respect, I'm leaving. So that is not an ultimatum per se, that's more of a boundary. That is showing somebody how you want to be treated and what you will do if you don't get the bare minimum, right? So it's okay to set boundaries. It is okay to set ground rules. If you're living together, it's okay to set those rules to say, hey, I will do this, I will contribute this, and you contribute that. A relationship should be beneficial to both parties involved or all parties involved. And if the relationship is no longer benefiting you in some way, it's okay to talk about it and try to see what you can do to change the relationship dynamic. Ultimatums are never the answer. They're controlling and they only lead to bad feelings all around. So the fourth toxic phrase that you may hear in a relationship is, I can't live without you. Now, I know this one sounds nice and it sounds really romantic, right? But this can be problematic. Anyone who is in a healthy relationship should be whole and complete on their own, and they should not need someone else to complete them. It's okay to want that, but if you literally feel like you cannot go on without this person, then there's almost definitely some toxicity in that relationship, or even just the way you view relationships as a whole. And so if somebody says this to you, look at it the same way. I would look at it as a red flag that maybe this person isn't emotionally healthy enough for a relationship. And that doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. But if somebody is not emotionally ready for a relationship, things can go south and they can get really ugly. This kind of goes back to the concept of taking care of your own stuff and healing your own wounds before jumping into a relationship. Because even if you have the best intentions, if you're jumping into a relationship and you are completely unhealed and you're bringing a whole lot of baggage to the table, there's going to be a mess. There's no way around it. And someone could end up getting hurt. Maybe it's you, maybe it's the other person. So no matter what, if this phrase is said with true intention, I can't live without you, this phrase is problematic. All right, so the next toxic phrase that you might encounter in any kind of relationship, especially with a narcissist, maybe some other type of manipulative person. But this one's going to sound super obvious, but there are variations to it that are not quite as obvious. So I'm going to start off with the obvious. You're stupid. Now, of course, if somebody says you're stupid, that should be a red flag, right? Name calling should be a red flag. But there are other ways that this presents itself. There are other ways that somebody can call you stupid without actually saying those words. Somebody might say something like, okay, let me explain this to you like you're a child. Let me dumb this down for you. Or another more subtle way that someone can call you stupid in a conversation without actually saying those words is this. I'm going to explain something to you right now, and I'm going to need you to do your best to follow along. Now that implies that you need to struggle to follow a conversation. There are so many ways that people can send this condescending, I'm smarter than you, I'm better than you message. but whatever way it comes through, it is no good. That should be a major, major red flag, especially if you see it early on. So the sixth toxic phrase starts with "you always" or "you never." Now, these are absolutes that do show up a lot in relationships. So this is one where I wouldn't say if you hear this, completely run. But really, just like all of these phrases, they give you an opportunity to take a closer look, take a deeper dive. So the toxic phrase that I'm talking about that starts with "you always" or "you never," it doesn't end with something nice. It's not "you always look great" or "you always are so kind." It's more like "you always focus on the negative" or "you always bring up stuff from the past." And while these things kind of seem like they are communicating feelings, they are also accusing. They're very accusatory statements. When you start something with "you always" or "you never," that creates the groundwork for an argument. Because when you're saying that you always do this, it's kind of like you're attacking that person's character, right? You're saying that this is who you are. You are somebody who always does this, or you are somebody who never does that. You never see the bright side in things. And usually things are not so absolute. If you've encountered this one, or if maybe you've even been guilty of this on your own, this is a sign that you might need to set some boundaries. So if you're the one saying something like "you always interrupt me," that's a boundary that you can set. I feel unheard when you interrupt me. And if that's going to continue to happen, I don't see any point in having this conversation. So the seventh toxic phrase is, "oh, you remind me of my ex," or "oh, my ex used to do that." So let's say you bring up an issue with the relationship, with the person that you're in a relationship with, and that person says, "no one I've ever dated has ever had an issue with this before." And so that may or may not be true, but in saying it that way and presenting it that way, that is triangulation. And there are definitely better ways to open the communication on that topic. So the ninth toxic phrase is, "if you loved me, you would do this." And this is straight up manipulation. You should never feel like you have to prove your love to someone. If you love someone, they should know it. And the 10th toxic phrase that you might hear in a toxic relationship is, "if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you." And this is usually said when the person is upset about something. They're mad at you for something that you did, but they want you to figure it out instead of communicating it themselves. This is kind of similar to the silent treatment in that they leave you in a position where you're walking on eggshells because you're not sure what you did wrong. And so you're not really sure how to make it right. You just basically have to guess until they decide to tell you, if they decide to tell you. And if they don't, then you just keep walking on eggshells until the next time something like this comes up. So if you found this video helpful, I'm going to bet that you are going to relate to some of the gaslighting phrases that I mentioned in this video right here. And if you're new to the channel, you may not have seen it, so I'm going to link to it, and I suggest that you watch it. So if you found this video helpful, please do go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. These things help the video and the channel, and I will see you next time.